Easier for smugglers to cross the border unnoticed.
Much easier to have all sorts of communication, especially through the illegal website.
The wealthier parts of the world.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Headlines with me, Hazwin Hassan. Today we first bring our attention to gun control and airport security. It was just last weekend when a man carrying a semi-automatic pistol opened fire at KLIA's Terminal 1 arrival hall, seriously injuring a bodyguard. The suspected gunman, a 38-year-old Hafizul Harawi, managed to flee the scene, driving northwards before finally being arrested at the Malaysian-Thai border in Kelantan on Tuesday, almost 3 days later. It was found that Hafizul is not a licensed gun owner and had obtained it illegally from a neighbouring country. While police are still investigating how the weapon entered the country undetected, the NSC reported that Sungai Golok in Kelantan, where the Malaysian-Thai border lies, has seen a surge of firearm smuggling brought in from Thailand into the country. It said that the hot and dry weather, which has dried up parts of Sungai Golok, has made it easier for smugglers to cross the border unnoticed. And later on in our second segment, we'll take a look at how the ringgit is faring, with it said to be hinging on how the Chinese yuan performs. A fall in the yuan could possibly push the ringgit to surpass 4.8 against the US dollar, making it the worst since the 1998 Asian financial crisis. But of course, more on the ringgit later. Now, on gun control. So herein lies the big question. We had a gunman on the loose at the airport last Sunday in the wee hours of the morning. And we have a gun smuggling problem over at our border in the north. Are our entry points safe, and are we doing enough about it? So to help unpack these rather loaded questions, I have joining me via video call Professor Dr. Muhammad Mizan Muhammad Aslam from the National Defence University of Malaysia, who's a security expert. Professor, welcome to Beyond the Headlines. Pleasure to have you on the show with us. Right, Professor. So before we address the security concerns at the airport, I'd first like to get to the root of it all, right? We have a serious gun smuggling problem. Granted, it's entirely illegal for civilians to own guns of that sort, the one used in the airport shooting, with or without a license. I think the laws are fairly clear on that. But people still have access to it. Is there not enough policing at the border? And what are our border agencies doing about it?
Actually, we do have enough policy. We do have good procedures, and we do have all these SOPs. But the problem is we don't have enough integrity. That's what I can say. And also another issue, it is related to the competency of the machines that we do have in our border. So if we go, for example, in Bukit Kayu Hitam or Padang Besar, so there are machines, scanner machine, for example, which is not working or maybe not really fully utilized. So all those things make all these criminal and syndicates easy to maneuver and smuggle things back to this country.
Now, just before the KLIA shooting, police arrested an Israeli national who was found with 6 handguns on him. Among the pistols he had were a Glock 19 Marine, a Glock 17 Gen 4, a Smith & Wesson, a Sig Sauer or Sawyer, and a Stoger, along with 200 rounds of ammunition. I mean, surely, anyone in their right mind would think no civilian would need this many types and number of firearms. So these were illegally bought from a local couple, to add to that, and they were obtained from Thailand, obviously illegally. So one begs the question, how can it be this easy?
In relation to the Israeli agent that been detained in this country, so we can see actually the issue starts from days before they come here. So the guy come here into this country, so he already make an arrangement with the couple, which is Malay couple, to get the weapons as well as ammunitions. So things now will be much easier to have all sorts of communication, especially through the illegal website or so-called dark web. And through this, so they make a lots of arrangement, and they are willing to buy some guns or weapons, and maybe they can also request for certain operations, certain issues and attack and whatsoever. So all these things actually it is not that easy, but they have the medium or mechanism. Whoever try to find it, they will find the best method to get all those things. But for normal people, for civilians, which is we are not aware and we don't have needs for that, so it is like impossible. But for those who really want to have it, so they have all those kind of mechanism.
Now, yesterday it was announced that the Home Ministry will soon draft new legislation aimed at enhancing oversight of the nation's entry points. The plan is to establish a central coordinating agency to streamline operations among multiple security agencies. I'd like to think of it as our very own FBI in a sense, but one would think that this would already have been in place since our security agencies are all under federal jurisdiction. The border agency, immigration, customs, what have you. What do you think will be different this time?
Yeah, for me, if we want to have like a joint task force or joint agencies to cater the issue of smugglings, weapons, contraband or whatsoever, actually we should learn from what had happened recently. So a few years back, we have AXAM, Agensi Kawalan Sempadan, which is we managed to bring a few enforcement agencies, including PDRM. We got military as well as RELA and do customs, immigration as well. But then later on, it was abolished, and then are we now going to redo again? For me, it is can be done, but we should learn from what had happened, and finally it was dismantled. So what are the strong and weaknesses from the past joint agencies that we do have? So we should learn, and we should make it much better this time. Otherwise, we will repeat the same mistake. So this is the thing that should be bear in mind for those who wants to implement this idea.
Professor, the government, when something like this happens, which is not the first, tends to be more reactive. When can we start seeing them be more proactive?
Yeah, at this time being, we should not too worry about schooling or the public sphere as area and whatsoever. So the thing now, we have to give some belief to our enforcement, especially PDRM, Royal Malaysian Police, because we see the arrest of Abid Shalom, the Israel agent in Malaysia, actually is a very good job by the PDRM, especially after the 7 October attack in Gaza and in Israel. So since that moment, the task force have been established, and then the issues have been monitored closely. So we can see with that kind of capacity, finally we managed to arrest and we dismantle the syndicate and the big ring between them. So with this kind of thing, people shouldn't be worried and give trust and belief to our enforcement agencies to do their job. But we need to support them, supply all of sorts of information that we have.
You know, when shootings like the KLIA one happen in such an open public space, you have to think Will this be the start of more? Last weekend, a man was seriously wounded, the bodyguard of the intended victim. Now, if guns can be easily bought from the border, how far are we then from potential mass shootings, like the ones we see happening in the US? Do we have to start worrying for the safety of our children now in schools too, where, like in the US, the majority of these mass shootings happen?
Yeah, the recent shooting incident in KLIA also a good indicator that the issues of smuggling, arms smuggling is things that very serious right now, and people will be have the opportunity to assess the weapon. And also with this kind of thing, maybe they will lead to another incident. As we know that shooting in KLIA is a public area, and it might happen in another places, tourist attraction places, for example, KLCC or Pavilion or whatsoever. And also schools, as we know, happen frequently, especially in United States of America. So weapon and shooting actually is two things that we have to be careful, and I do believe that we should not make things easy for people to have access to weapon, and then with the best capacity we should stop it, and then the border security should be enhanced in whatever means.
Professor, the arrival hall where the KLIA shooting took place, that's an open area. You don't need a passport or a boarding pass or have to go through security checkpoints to enter, right? I mean, you don't need to. But nonetheless, it's part of an airport. It's a major entry point into the country, for any country, that is. So should we start beefing up security there and have gun detection and security check every person that walks in? And if we should, maybe should we then just not limit it to the arrival hall of terminals at airport? I think the entire airport should have the same SOPs then while we're at it. What do you think, Professor?
Yeah, somehow I think we need the instrument of like a pre-security check, especially for civilians who wants to come into the public area, especially airport. So I may say two incidents. For example, the one that had happened a few years back in relation to the North Korea, Kim Jong Nam, who been killed by the agent, and also the shooting that happened recently. So it is good actually for us to have like a pre-security check, which is everybody who come to the very specific or very special area, security type should be happen, and all like a body scanner and kind of bags that they bring in have to be through the scanner or the security machine. I think that should be taken into consideration.
Now, police say that they will soon equip their patrol officers at KLIA with scooters to ensure faster response to security breaches and threats, just like the one that happened over the last weekend. Do you think that that's going to bring about much difference? What's your take on that, Professor?
Yeah, I think a fast decision by police to equip their officers with the scooters to have like a urgent response to all sorts of incidents in KLIA, or maybe in another tourist attraction area such as Pavilion or KLCC or everywhere. I think that's a very great decision, and I think we need that, which is not only in KLIA but in any places that we think it is the possible of such kind of attack. And we should not deny that the incident like this not an issue that can be isolated. So one issue, one incident can tarnish the whole country's reputation and will pull out all of these good initiatives taken by the government so far.
Now, Professor, just before we end the segment, I'd just like to round off our discussion for today and ask you, how can we better prepare and protect ourselves in the event of something as unfortunate as a public or mass shooting, or something like what we saw last weekend? I mean, albeit it wasn't a mass shooting, but it was a gunman on the loose that could have potentially hurt more people, than it did. So, how can we better protect ourselves in the sense of, in your years studying, security, and perhaps you've seen patterns among criminals and active shooters. What's the common trait among them? What is it what is something that we need to look out for? Is there a particular trait that makes them stand out from amongst the rest?
Yeah, for civilians, I think so far we don't have good information in response to this kind of incidents or attacks or whatsoever. So I think it is a right time also for the government, for the country to disseminate information, especially to the people, to the civilians, when this kind of incident or this kind of attack happen, what we should do, what we should react. But for now, I think as civilians, we need to be alert and also supply all sorts of information that we have to the government and to the enforcement. And I think the enforcement officers also need to be aware and have a regular check, as well as guide some people in any kind of incident. All right, and also we need to disseminate information through media, especially mainstream media, for the people, for the civilian. If you see, for example, something that very weird or awkward, things like that, so we have to respond and to tell the enforcement officer in order to avoid any catastrophic to the people and to the country.
Right, Professor, thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today on Beyond the Headlines. That was really an insightful discussion into something I think that is very timely, and unfortunately something like this had to be addressed, something as bad and unfortunate as a public shooting where a gunman on the loose was in a public area like an airport, which obviously has the nation still reeling in shock as we speak. But I hope that from this discussion, this will give the government something to think about and to make sure that we have more proactive measures when it comes to security breaches and situations like this. So thank you again, Professor Dr. Mirza Muhammad Aslam, for our views at home from the National Defence University of Malaysia, our security expert for today. Now, those of you watching, stay put, because we will be right back to chat with our special guest, again via video call all the way from Bangkok, on how the ringgit is holding up. Don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. Welcome back. So now on the weakening ringgit, which is potentially under threat due to the falling Chinese yuan. So just recently, the Business Times reported that should the yuan depreciate even further, this could mean bringing the ringgit lower beyond 4.8 against the US dollar. Now, this forecast by SBI Asset Management Managing Director Stephen Innes means that the local note may continue to weaken until the Federal Reserve in the US signals a rate cut, a move that will only happen in the event of an inflation easing or a significant deterioration in US economic data, possibly in the fourth quarter of this year. And to help expand more on this discussion, we have none other than Stephen Innes himself joining us via video call from Bangkok. Stephen, welcome to Beyond the Headlines. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today. Right, so joining me right now via video call all the way from Bangkok is Stephen Innes, the SBI Asset Management Managing Director, who recently told the Business Times that there's a potential threat to the ringgit if the Chinese yuan continues to fall. As has been predicted, it has actually reached quite an all-time low in the last 3 or 4 months or so against the US dollar, and there's a huge chance that it will bring down the ringgit even lower, bringing it, if it happens, to unprecedented low levels against the US dollar ever since the 1998 Asian financial crisis. So with me today, obviously, is Stephen Innes. Stephen, thank you very much for coming on and spending time with us today. Welcome to Beyond the Headlines. Right. So recently, you gave an analysis and you told the Business Times that with the US dollar acting as one wrecking ball and the potential for a weaker Chinese yuan, acting as another, Asian currencies could face significant pressure. So it's not just the ringgit. While obviously the concern right now is the ringgit's performance, it's actually the entire region, the continent here. How important is keeping the yuan strong then, given the tight spot we found ourselves in?
But the big worry we have in Asian markets right now is really emanating from the Japanese yen, believe it or not, because the feeling is that they've got a huge competitive advantage in the export markets relative to other Asian currencies because of the weak yen. So, PBOC is in a situation right now where they're looking to stimulate the economy without creating capital outflows. So how do you go about doing that? Well, I guess one way is trying to moderate strength in the local currency. So what we've been doing is we've been watching the Chinese PBOC fixes on a daily basis, and they've been gradually weakening those slowly over the past couple of weeks. But we haven't seen that bigger weakening that perhaps a few of us were expecting. Look, if they do weaken the yuan, it would be directly for competitive trade advantage. And I think because of that, other currencies in the region would have to follow suit. Otherwise, they will lose that competitive advantage. Now, that's where the trade-off really happens. And all this right now is getting compounded by the fact that markets, FX markets in particular, had priced in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 interest rate cuts from the Federal Reserve this year. Now we're down to 1. Possibly 2. So put all this together, and you've got sort of the wrecking ball effect coming from the east and west, which is certainly weighing negatively on local currencies, and particularly the ringgit, over the past several months.
What exactly is the Chinese central bank doing about this, and what are they expected to do? Because they've been faced with quite a bit of pressure, having to do quantitative easing, monetary easing to basically meet market expectations, right? So this is not good news at all for the other the currencies in the region, especially for the ringgit. So what can we expect the central bank in China to do?
Well, they're trying to be very, very, how can I say, cute. In other words, they're making some adjustments on the daily fix to allow the trading band more flexibility, but they are not overtly signaling a weaker currency. I think the fear here is that we could see capital outflows triggered by a weaker currency. In other words, what we're seeing right now is a lot of money going into gold markets to defend against weaker local currencies right now. And I think this is one thing that the PBOC wants to try to avoid, is an overt weakening and driving outflows through either direct or indirect channels like gold. So it's a bit of a trade-off while you're trying to stimulate the economy. Look, I think this is the root problem in China is not really an interest rate situation. In other words, lower interest rates are not going to drive the property sectors anymore. And that's really where the problems for China sit. What they really need is fiscal stimulus. And at the moment, China has so many problems on their fiscal book with so much debt that they're unwilling to create more debt because that might even cause a bigger disruption in financial markets right now. So they're really in a delicate spot where they're just trying to be on both ends of the stick sort of thing, moderate a slightly lower interest rate, kind of defend the yuan from weakening too aggressively, but letting it weaken a little bit to stir exports. So this is where we're at right now. It's a bit messy and it's a bit confusing, but look, these markets have been messy and confusing since we entered this COVID scheme. And what we've learned over the past couple of years is that we're in a totally new regime when it comes to stock markets, when it comes to foreign exchange markets, and when it comes to investing all around the world right now. It's a very difficult landscape to navigate.
Is this, it seems like it's bad news all around. Is this not going to bode well for investors into the country, into Malaysia right now?
Well, there's a couple of schools of thought here. Like, I don't mind investing in countries that have a weaker currency, provided the weaker currency is not going to weaken further. So in other words, if we're sort of setting our targets right now where we see a top end around 480 or so, this could actually be quite appealing to buy stocks at that level. The reason being is that if the currency appreciates, you not only gain from stock markets and dividend yield, but you also get a pickup from the currency markets. Looking at other Asia markets right now, like look at up here in Thailand, for instance, we're also suffering from a weaker currency, but because it's such a hot tourist destination for Europeans and even Americans right now, is that we're starting to see an influx of money coming into the property sector. People taking advantage of the weak currencies, investing in condominiums and what have you in Bangkok and a lot of popular tourist destinations. You don't see that dynamic happening so much in Malaysia, but it would be really good if the government would open up those avenues because that would certainly drive a lot of an inward investment to the country.
Right. And on the part of the U.S., what does it mean that they're now in the midst of a rate cuts, a delay in rate cuts? What does that mean for the performance of the ringgit, and if that's going to help? And how does that fare against the yuan?
Well, what we're having right now is a total reevaluation of monetary policy in the U.S., which is actually strengthening the U.S. dollars because the market had assumed more rate cuts than actually what the Fed are going to be delivering. The biggest problem we have in the U.S. right now is inflation. We've also got a resurgence in growth, which is just incredible right now in the face of higher interest rates. Sure, there's a lot of interesting theories out there why higher interest rates are not stymieing the U.S. consumer, but it's just not right now. The Fed obviously has to walk a delicate spot here because wealthy people are doing very well, but poor people have no money and they can't borrow to buy houses. And this is a big problem. So what are the Feds going to do? Are they going to keep interest rates higher? Are they going to move interest lower like in the election year? Obviously, once the Fed signals a drop in interest rates, that'll create an environment where Asian currencies can at least have some breathing room, if not start to flourish a little bit more. Because right now, when you look at the relative yield appeal, it's certainly favoring the U.S. right now. So in other words, people will take their Malaysian ringgits, switch it into U.S. and invest in 5% yields, money market yields, as opposed to doing anything else with their money. And this is where the problem lies. Money would ideally prefer to flow the other way, or money would prefer to stay in the country and invest in the stock market to stimulate the economy through that effect, but it's not doing that right now.
What role then does our central bank play in this? in making sure that it doesn't keep going lower, further down, in spite of perhaps, whatever the Chinese yuan is struggling with right now. What should our bank be? Yeah.
The great thing that Malaysians can count on is that we're very, very good central bank. Very, very knowledgeable about how these interplays of the foreign exchange market work. And obviously, this isn't the first time the ringgit's been in some semblance of crisis point, although I wouldn't use the crisis point at this point in time, simply because we're in a different regime from what we've ever been in before coming out of COVID. China is expected to do a lot better than it has. There's just a different dynamic going on in the world right now. And the Bank Negara recognizes this, and it recognizes the fact that in this environment, and I totally agree with her outlook that the ringgit is well undervalued. But the problem is talking about the ringgit being undervalued doesn't really change anything, because it's international flows that really do dictate the value of the ringgit, and more so from what exporters feel. You see, in Malaysia, because it's a currency that isn't traded internationally, basically exporters send their product abroad, receive US dollars. Now, to the extent that these exporters are motivated to start selling the dollar and buying the ringgit is the crucial factor. Right now, you've got dollar hoarding, simply because, as I alluded to earlier on, you can get 5% yield on your dollars. Mm-hmm. Now, who wouldn't be happy with that? So exporters are saying to themselves, well, are we going to see a 5% appreciation in the ringgit over the next 6 months? Or am I better just keeping my US dollars in the 5% deposit and reaping the 5% yield from deposits? That's the problem we're facing right now. So until we see those yields in the US drop and exporters in Malaysia stop hoarding US dollars, until that very point, I think the Malaysian ringgit will continue to trade with the weaker bodies.
Right. Okay. Is there anything else you would like to add so far that we haven't touched on?
You want to talk about the something that might your listeners and watchers might want, like something maybe around the tourist industry? Okay, so obviously Singapore dollar has actually been doing quite well, not quite well, but it's really weathered the storm a lot better than a lot of other Asian currencies. And, arguably, and we all know that Singapore is a very wealthy nation. A lot of people like to travel in there, and what better place for them to spend their relatively stronger US dollar than just crossing the causeway and going to Malaysia. And you're seeing that happen. There's a real pickup in that. But while it's benefiting the tourist sector, there's not enough of it driving the economy outside of the tourist sector to really stimulate more growth beyond the tourist and services sector. And that's the problem with relying on tourism industry, similar to what we have up here in Thailand, is that although we're doing very well in the tourist sector, it's not really feeding through to the broader economy outside of the tourist area.
Right. I mean, I suppose what we have in Malaysia, it's rather isolated. It's very localized. I think there was, we did a story not too long ago about a surge in Singaporeans coming over, taking advantage of the weak ringgit, right? And retailers, spa operators, they all reported, good business. But the thing is, it's quite localized and it's not spreading out enough throughout the country. So I think to the point you just made, I think that's what we're lacking, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It is. Thailand, for instance, attracts a lot of Europeans and a lot of Americans. Okay, Malaysia doesn't attract to the same degree those international travelers. And because the relative landscape in the Asian currencies is sort of log neutral, there's no real competitive advantage for, say, people from Thailand to go to Malaysia. We might as well just stay home. And that's part of the problem too. Across the region, mind you, I love KL. I would dying to get back again. It's just that my schedule up here is just too busy. But look, I think times are going to start to rock again, and I think tourism industry back into Malaysia is just going to pick up in earnest. But I think what has to happen right now, we have to have this drop in overall geopolitical risk that we're seeing in the world right now, which is just keeping everybody at home to a large extent. And we also have to see how the region is going to weather this political upheaval in the U.S. as we enter ultimately a very contentious U.S. election year. There's a lot of problems that we're facing, and this is all manifesting into the currency markets also. It's a very unique time that we're going through right now, and it's something quite unprecedented and very difficult to analyze in a broader picture. We're only taking guesses and educated conjectures at where currencies are going to be in the next year right now.
Right. On a rather related note, and I'm not sure if you've been following local news here, but we've had quite a few controversies. We've had the sock controversy, and politicians really milking the problem, the crisis, to their advantage, of course. Things like this, does it affect in any way the prospects, of the ringgit and possible foreign, investment coming in?
Well, if you're an investor in Malaysia, you're used to storm clouds hanging over KL, whether it's political or whether it's some other nature. There's always something going on in the political landscape that tends to make the country not as inviting to international investors. But I think to a large degree, progress is being made on that front. I think one of the really intriguing investment areas that Malaysia is going into is green energy. I think this is something that we're just sort of tapping into in the region right now. I think it's going to expand immensely over the next 5 to 10 years. I think Malaysia could be at the forefront of this simply because they have the O&G infrastructure, and it's really easy with that knowledge to expand into more carbon neutral technologies. And I think this is going to be one of the exciting areas that might transform Malaysia into a relatively higher tech region in Asia compared to what it has been over the last few years.
I think we've pretty much covered tourism and the currency, the regional currencies. I guess moving forward, I think more looking ahead to maybe the next year. We're done with the first quarter of the year, so moving ahead, looking at the remaining quarters, especially towards the end of the year of 2024. What would be the number one impetus, right? What has to happen to see a strengthening ringgit and currencies in the region?
Unquestionably, the Federal Reserve has to cut interest rates. That's the biggest impediment right now for stronger local Asian currencies. Simply with the Fed delaying rate cuts, it keeps that short end of the yield curve elevated. And, short-term money just continues to get attracted like a magnet to that 5% level in money market funds. So that's the first thing that has to happen. Mm-hmm. I think the second thing that has to happen is a decrease in geopolitical tensions globally. Geopolitical tensions tend to underpin the US dollar, especially through the oil channel. This used to benefit Malaysia in the past. However, now that US is a massive, colossal, if not the largest oil producer globally, they benefit from higher oil prices, so it's a trade-off there. But lastly, for the region, we need to see a significant recovery in China. I think we move quickly from 480 back below 450 on the ringgit. But, we're asking a lot here. We're asking a lot for these stars to align. I think we should probably look for maybe 1 or 1.5 of them aligning and be happy if the Malaysian ringgit starts to head towards 450 towards the first quarter of 2025, supported by crossing our fingers guess here that the Federal Reserve will cut interest rates towards the latter part of 2024.
Right. And because you brought up regional stability in the Middle East, with what's going on with Iran, and in the neighboring countries in that area, and even Bank Negara, our central bank, they've put out, a statement recently saying that we're trying our best to make sure that whatever's happening over there, we'll make sure that we'll do all we can to, make sure the markets are stable. Things like that, in a sense, it's inevitable. You can't really avoid, given the history and the context of what's happening in the Middle East. But to what end? How much really can the central bank, the Malaysian central bank, do what they can to ensure the markets remain stable? I'm sure things like that really, they push away any good investment, any worthy investment coming in. I think things like that will probably push those away. So how much really can the central banks control the situation?
Well, they don't really. They've only got one tool, and that's interest rates. And I think that policy proving quite ineffective. I've got some theories why it's ineffective. I think there's just a lot of people the wealthier parts of the world are a lot richer than they used to be. And the poor are actually a lot poorer, but the wealth effect by the middle class upwards is really driving this inflationary boom. If you look back at what happened over COVID, we had a central bank that had to step in, the Federal Reserve, that is, that had to step in and make credit markets very, very easy for big business. So they dropped interest rates dramatically. They allowed big businesses to term out their debts. In other words, they borrowed at very, very inexpensive levels, some sub 2% levels for multiple years. Individuals remortgaged their homes, sub 3%. Now, all these rates are going up. Okay, so corporates are cash rich right now, and they're investing their money back at 5% that they borrowed at 3%. So they're making quite a bit of spread there. Individuals received stimulus checks. They have received larger wages because of pressure on companies to keep top producers in the company. There's just a lot of money floating around. And that money is creating a dynamic of inflationary pressures, very much so in the U.S. Not so much in the rest of the world, but in the U.S. And this is what's keeping the global markets totally unbalanced right now.
Great. And I think before we round off the discussion, I'd just like to kind of maybe bring up, since you touched on the roles of the central banks, the Federal Reserve, and that in the U.S. in particular, there's the circulation of money is big right now, right? And that sort of, there's more money in the market than what it normally would be, and that somewhat brings me back to the 2007, 2008 U.S. financial crisis. When off the tail of the big bubble, the big housing bubble. And then, you had all those big banks and the too big to fail banks and, eventually having to be bailed out by the government. I think it was a 700 billion bailout, if I'm not mistaken, right? Are we going to see something similar if we, number one, because the concern is that with the Chinese central bank and then state-owned banks in China having to buy the dollar, which obviously brings down the yuan, all these sort of approaches to monetary easing, I think somewhat will potentially cause another big crisis, big financial crisis. What do you see coming out of this?
Well, there's a couple of things that have been safeguarded over the past, since the Asian crisis and also since the meltdown that we experienced in the the Lehman Brothers incident, whereby banks are better capitalized right now. So as far as market plumbing is concerned, reserve requirements held by these banks are quite sturdy. So there's probably not going to be any run in the banking system because of those government interventions we've seen locally, regionally, internationally. So that's a good thing. Although it didn't prevent a run on the small regional banks in the U.S. that were actually flying pretty much unreserved, and that was a problem. There weren't enough scrutinies, there weren't enough eyes on them. The biggest problem I see right now is this, and I'm going to use a comical term here. It's that the Treasury, U.S. Treasury, is going so far down the Ponzi scheme road right now as far as issuing so much debt. When you think about it right now, we're going to have close to 37 trillion in U.S. debt by the time the U.S. election happens. That's up from 10 trillion 2 years ago.
Right. Okay.
So that's just unfathomable. That's unfathomable. Trying to manage that coupon, that interest rate payment is just phenomenal.
Right.
And it's definitely going to put pressure on the overall economy at some time. Fortunately, it's getting delayed because of that wealth effect that I was referring to earlier, that the consumers in the U.S. are totally unbridled right now. But if it comes in a push to shove situation right now, I think we've got to keep our eye on the ball right now. And I think that wall of debt is going to come back to haunt, maybe not in the next 2 or 3 years, but certainly for the next generation, they're going to have to pay the bigger brunt on the amount of debt that are floating in U.S. and also Chinese markets. And this is going to be a problem that we're going to be dealing with in the not too distant horizon.
Okay, I think that pretty much rounds up our discussion for today. Thank you so much, Stephen, for joining me today. Right, Stephen, thank you so much for that. I think that pretty much wraps up our show for today as the second segment on the Ringgit ends. And once again, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank both my guests for today. We had Professor Dr. Muhammad Mizan Muhammad Aslam earlier, our security expert from the National Defence University of Malaysia, who talked about much needed gun control issue and airport security in light of what happened last weekend at KLIA. And again, to Stephen, our Ringgit expert from SBI Asset Management. Thank you both for taking time to speak to Beyond the Headlines, albeit via video call. Now, to those of you watching, thank you for staying tuned as ever, as usual. If you enjoyed this particular episode, please hit that like button and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, the channel you're watching this show on right now, NST Online on YouTube. Again, also don't forget to follow us on all the socials. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and X at NST Online for more news and all the latest updates. Be sure to turn on the notification bell so that you never miss out. Well, that's it for now. I'm Hazwin Hassan. Thank you for watching. Until the next one, goodbye.